Greetings, everyone. My name is Salik Malik, and I'm the president of Open Toronto. Open is the organization of Pakistani entrepreneurs. It was started way back in 1998 by a group of 8 friends of Pakistani origin. And the main purpose is to assist the Pakistani diaspora improve themselves and to give back to their new communities. Since then, Open has expanded to 13 chapters in North America, Europe, and Pakistan, and with Open Toronto being the only Canadian chapter. At Open Toronto, we hold events such as the one tonight, which we are co-hosting with the DMZ, featuring speakers who can inspire and educate the audience. Our main purpose is to bring good people together and hopefully they will lead to collaborations in of an entrepreneurial nature. By the way, here's a plug. Open Toronto's annual event is next month at the Sheraton Toronto Airport Hotel and Conference Center on the 21st of September. And if you visit our website, opentoronto.org, you can learn more about us and also register yourselves. A big thank you to our co-hosts at the DMZ for putting up this amazing event. There are too many people I would like to thank, but I'll just point out a few, and I'd request them to stand up. Saqib Wali from Open Toronto, please stand up. Veronica Grushenska. Ali Tayyib and Veronica Grushenska from the DMZ. They really ran with the event once Mudassir kindly gave us the go-ahead. For those of you who don't know, the DMZ is a leading accelerator and incubator that helps tech startups scale to world-class businesses. More than a home for entrepreneurs, the DMZ positively impacts the world by preparing tech founders for global expansion, which enables them to foster more made-in-Canada jobs and build technologies that change lives. To date, the DMZ has accelerated 400 companies that have raised over $625 million and fostered 3,800 jobs. So great work, DMZ. If you are a tech founder and are looking to grow your business, you are in the right place. And here, Mudassir, you may want to take note for your next venture. Okay. Okay, Mr. Abdullah Snobar, who is the executive director of the DMZ, has kindly agreed to be tonight's moderator. Under his leadership, the DMZ was named the #1 university-based incubator in the world. And our featured speaker tonight is Mudassir Sheikha. He's the CEO and co-founder of Careem. He grew up in Karachi, Pakistan, and after completing his master's in computer science from Stanford, he started his career in tech startups and VC financing in Silicon Valley. Then he moved back to Pakistan, founded a company, sold it, and then joined a management consultancy firm, McKinsey & Company in Dubai. In 2012, he left McKinsey and along with another McKinsey colleague, Magnus Olson, decided to start a new venture. And the idea was not just to build a big business, but to start one that would have a great impact. And that became Careem. Today, Careem is the leading ride-hailing app in MENA, Turkey, and Pakistan, and is the region's only tech unicorn. They operate in more than 120 cities across 14 countries with more than 3,000 employees, and a fact that they're most proud of, they're creating between 60 to 70,000 jobs per month. So without further ado, I promised my wife and daughter that I would not make my flat jokes, so I won't. So ladies and gentlemen, Open Toronto and the DMZ are proud to bring you Mudassir Sheikha.
Thank you very much, Salik, and thank you to Open for really picking the DMZ as a host for this. And I think it's very fitting on the basis that there's a lot of commonalities here between what you're doing and between who we support, which is entrepreneurs in tech. So it's an exciting time, and we're going to have a lot to talk about and hopefully a lot of learning. Just an FYI for the people in the crowd, we're going to have some Q&A at the end of this, so make sure that you kind of start gearing up your questions. I'll keep my questions to you mild, and then maybe you guys can come out a bit harder. Is that okay? I know we're in the right crowd. First of all, I'm not sure if you know, Toronto has been, is the most diverse city in the world, and that's a fact right now. And there was some discussion between London, UK, and Toronto, Canada. And the two mayors went up on BNN and they started discussing, and eventually the London mayor, kind of came back and said, you know what, you're absolutely right. Toronto is the most diverse city in the world, and I think you can see that just by the people in this room. And I think even more fitting than that, Sadiq, when you were mentioning about DMZ being ranked #1 in the world, I heard a lot of mashallah, mashallah, mashallah. So we are definitely in the right space here together. Before getting started, Mudassir, thank you very much for being in the city. Thank you for this is not your first time, is it?
No, this is almost second home. My in-laws live in Toronto, so I have to be a little careful what I say and what jokes I crack.
Okay, so that means we can always agree that Toronto is one of the best cities in the world. So we're good on that part. And it's really good to have you here. We're going to have a chance to kind of get pretty deep into it. But I want to tell you a story, actually, before we get started. My first interaction with Careem. And it kind of, the story itself will show you how well positioned you folks were. I learned about Careem through my mother. Now, my mother is a 67-year-old wonderful lady living in Amman, Jordan. And I go to Jordan, and we have some work that we do there. And I get down, and I want to use Uber, and I want to get to the office with Uber. My mom's like, "Are you crazy? You have to use Careem." I'm like, "What's Careem?" She's like, "It's the best thing that's ever happened in Amman, Jordan. You got to start using this thing at this point." So I get in, my mom orders the car for me. She's like, they have cleaner cars, they have better drivers, they have this and that, and she was promoting it. And at one point I said, "Did you buy stocks in this company? And what's going on here?" In any case, that was my first interaction in Jordan. Until this day, most of my family is actually are quite loyal to the Careem brand. So it's wonderful to have you. So before we get started, let's get into maybe some rapid fire questions, just so the audience can get a chance to know you a bit better. Is that okay? So first and foremost, before we dig heavy, I want to ask, what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning?
So other than checking email, which is a habit, I pray and then I prioritize what things I need to do for the day.
Okay. Best piece of advice that you've received from an entrepreneur?
Every problem is an opportunity. The bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity.
Interesting. Hope you guys are taking notes back here. What's your productivity secret?
Not much, I was never the sharpest cookie in the class. So for me, I just have to extend my days, work a little bit harder, okay, and cram more in that time.
Do you also wish that we had more than 24 hours in the day?
Of course, always.
Yeah. Okay, good to know. Who's someone that you look up to or who has influenced you in your life?
So that would be Careem's co-founder, Magnus Olsson, who was mentioned before. He really inspires by leading with purpose, and I think someone that Careem is very, very blessed to have on board.
Okay, fantastic. If you can be a teacher of any subject, what subject would you teach? And I'm going to talk primarily around like elementary school.
Elementary school.
The young folks, yeah. What would you teach them? Because we're not talking about university, because we know what you can teach at university level.
No, I think the elementary school, I'll probably get fired very quickly because I've forgotten all math and English and everything else that we learned. But probably math. I can give that a shot.
Okay, good to know. So, we have, unfortunately, we don't have many teaching jobs in Toronto right now. We have a shortage of jobs and a lot of supplies, so we'll hold off on that part. What's your favorite place to visit or travel to, besides Toronto?
Of course. No, we actually, my wife and I, we went to Iceland recently, and the place gives you a lot of perspective, right? Because in that sort of country, island, people talk about what happened millions of years ago, and they still talk about that iceberg that is the glacier that's melting. And it just gives you a perspective on time and how small we are and how big some of these issues that we make of small things.
Interesting, okay. Favorite artist or music?
Nothing that comes to mind. If you look at my playlist, I'll probably have more Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan than others, but that's probably how it looks like.
Well, just to make sure, I want you to know this before you leave the city. I don't know if you've heard of Drake, the artist Drake. I'm a big fan, and he's a Torontonian through and through, proud, and whenever he mentions the 6 in his music, he's actually talking about the city of Toronto. And the 6 represents the 6 boroughs that surround the city. So there you know.
Wow.
So now you learn something new. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Okay, every time? Or
Not every time.
Sometimes you do. Okay,
Mostly.
so you do drink coffee?
Yes.
Okay. And when you were a kid, what did you want to be growing up?
Pilot.
Wow. like a commercial pilot. Okay.
Commercial pilot, yeah.
Okay, and why didn't that happen then?
Somehow, when I sort of grew up and left college, everyone was doing tech, and that was sort of the thing to do versus being a pilot. So I just stumbled on tech, and the rest just followed.
Okay. I'll tell you a secret. I wanted to be a pilot as well, but I'm colorblind, so I can't be a pilot. And that's good for all of us, by the way. So you don't want me flying. Basketball or hockey? And I left cricket out of this one intentionally, by the way. So basketball or hockey?
Yeah, probably basketball.
Basketball. Okay. And I'm sure you already know, but we're the world champs.
That's true, yeah.
That was planted, and I knew he was going to say basketball. I knew it was going to be. If I put soccer in here, it might have been a different answer. And my last question for you is: what's something that you truly fundamentally believe in? One thing you truly fundamentally believe in for the world, even if I had to put it that way.
I think I do believe in hard work, that if you want to do something in life, you have to work really hard for it. And that will come at the expense of some sacrifices. But nothing big will happen without a lot of hard work and some sacrifices.
So for the entrepreneurs in the room, I hope you folks know that 24 hours a day of work is not unusual. Clearly, you can figure things out, but you gotta make sure that you put all the work in the hard work to get the payout, of course. So we're gonna get in some of the questions that we want to ask.
Sure.
So you've mentioned in the past while working at McKinsey in 2011 that you had a desire to build something that would actually have a significant impact, and your desire came after how you saw only one company in Pakistan that was actually $1 billion business, and you thought there can be more that can be done that would actually create a huge impact for the country. What are some of the initial ideas that you had stepping into the entrepreneurship, and what made you and your co-founder decide that Careem was a company that would actually create socioeconomic impact for what you believed in?
Yeah. So I think just to maybe elaborate on that story a little bit for people that may be unfamiliar. So Careem started in 2012, and there were two interesting things that happened in 2011 that sort of drove the creation of Careem. And the one that you refer is actually the less important one. Let me talk about the more dramatic thing that happened. So in 2011, Magnus Olsson, he was at a conference in London, and he's the co-founder of Careem. He actually, for a few seconds, went blind. He could not see anymore. And it happened again and again and again. And he just casually mentioned this to his dad, saying that this is happening, maybe I'm not getting enough sleep, maybe I'm too stressed. But then his dad, who was a doctor, quickly picked it up and basically said, this is not normal, you got to get yourself checked up. Turned out that there was some bleeding in his brain that had completely frozen in time, and he had survived that initial bleeding. And he was basically told that he's a ticking time bomb, he could die anytime, and that he has to basically go and get himself operated on. Goes to the doctor, the best surgeon in the world apparently on this topic, and gets told that there's a 15% chance that he will not survive the surgery. But it still has to be done because otherwise it's completely unpredictable. So as you can imagine, I think he was 30 years old at that time, is basically told that he will probably not survive, say all your goodbyes before you go into the operating room. Life became very, very clear for him. And he basically came out with what he calls 3 commandments of life. And there was a big desire to leave a legacy by building something big and by building something meaningful. So that really was the origin of Careem. For me, the way it sort of intersected with his life and his story was the incident that you mentioned in Pakistan. I was part of a team at McKinsey. We were asked to open an office in Pakistan. And like any consulting firm, when you go to a new country, you basically make a list of all the clients that you can serve in the country. McKinsey generally serves bigger clients. We went to the stock exchange, made a list of all the biggest companies in Pakistan, and found out, shockingly and embarrassingly, that there was only one company on the stock exchange at that time that was worth $1 billion.
Wow.
And it wasn't just, $1 billion is just a number, right? But what was shocking is that not many companies in places like Pakistan had reached scale. And when you look at the raw material of building businesses, you realize that we have people that are hardworking, that are smart, that are enterprising, but for some reason or the other, we are not able to organize ourselves and have the right ambition level to sort of achieve these things. So when I ran into Magnus as he was coming back, calling himself Magnus 2.0 and re-immersing himself into the real world, I had this experience, and when he said wanted to build something big, I'm like, I'm up for it. Let's figure out how to do something big and something meaningful. Now, when you want to do something meaningful, the first things that you look at are ideas in the healthcare and the education space, because those are meaningful sectors, those are big as well. So we looked at some ideas in healthcare and education, and I sort of told Magnus that, hey, what about transportation? We were consultants, constantly moving around, things were never easy. You know, most of the captains, we don't call them drivers, we call them captains, the people that drive for us, are from Pakistan in the Middle East, especially in Dubai and in Saudi. So I was able to connect with them even before we started Careem and realize that, you know, things are very tough for them. And most of these people come from different parts of Pakistan. They work 16, 18-hour days. 90% of the money they make, they send back home to feed their families and educate their kids. And they even don't live in a dedicated bed, right? Their bed is also shared in different shifts with other people that need a living. So initially, the transportation idea came up from our own sort of experience as consultants moving around. And it wasn't clear to Magnus how this is meaningful, because his thing was that I'm getting a second chance in life, and you're telling me to start a taxi company. How is that meaningful?
Oh, yeah.
And then when he sort of saw the depth of what could be done, it became very, very clear to both of us that this could become something very, very meaningful. And frankly, it's actually become a lot more meaningful than we realized, because not only have we been able to create more than 1 million jobs and 60 to 70,000 new jobs every month, which was the scale that we had never imagined, but in places like Saudi, you know, women especially talk about a pre-Careem Saudi and a post-Careem Saudi. In a pre-Careem Saudi, they were dependent on their fathers, brothers, husbands, or a common driver at home that they were sharing with other family members. In a post-Careem Saudi, they're free, right? They can move at their own whim without being dependent on anyone. So this has become a lot more meaningful than we realized. But it was the desire to build something big and meaningful, and this fit both the criteria.
So, you know, it's funny that you mentioned that, you know, going back to Magnus' story about the 15% probability of failure. You know, I took my wisdom teeth out and they told me I have 1% probability of failure, and I walked out. I'm like, there's no way I'm doing this. 1%, you got, you know, I'm out of here. So obviously there's a lot of courage for him to even be kind of going through that whole process, and then throughout that, thinking about building something that's going to have impact. And then for you to kind of come in and support him and kind of getting to where you guys are. What do you think some of the main traits are that kind of got both of you to become as successful as you are today? Because it's not, I'm sure this was a very rough journey. I'm sure this wasn't a smooth thing. There's a lot of turbulence along the way. So how do you navigate that? And what are some of the traits that you believe kind of helped you succeed?
Yeah, so it did help that both of us were somewhat complementary in our approaches to life and what we brought to the table. I think Magnus is very, very detail-oriented and really leads with purpose, as I mentioned. For me, I'm like the slogger, right? I'm going to just stay at the problem until I figure it out and I get it done. I think in Magnus's case, what he brought to the table that really helped us was the purpose. And every time we were down, we sort of had a calling for the purpose of Careem, which I'll elaborate later on. And that sort of pulled us up, right? Because this wasn't something that was being done just to sort of get rich or start a business and become famous. It was really a calling that had started Careem in some shape or form. So that purpose sort of got us out of the trenches every time we were in it. And I think the thing that I brought to the table was probably perseverance. You know, my wife is sitting here. She knows that she rejected me almost 3 times before she said yes. So I tend not to give up, and I stay at the problem.
There you go. So that I love that. Personal and professionally, you don't give up. That's really good. Maybe we could shift gears a little bit and talk a bit about scale up, because that's an important topic even in Canada, and a lot of our startups here are focusing on scale up as well. So I think no matter what sector you're in, you're always going to find and hit huge roadblocks along the way of trying to scale your business in new regions in particular. Careem is huge on that particular topic as well. So when you and your co-founder began Careem, you focused specifically on the region known as the Gulf Corporation Council, GCC, which then comprised of 6 countries. At what point did you know for sure that you wanted to kind of go to greater lengths, that you wanted to be able to kind of scale beyond that? And what were the risks attached to it, and how did you mitigate around that?
Yeah, so as you know, we were consultants before we started Careem, so we knew how to make good PowerPoint slides, especially when it comes to presenting to investors. So when it came to visioning and strategy, we at least knew how to draw these things and get people excited. So I was actually looking at the first investor deck of Careem, And we had drawn these 3 horizons of growth that we start in the GCC, then we go to the rest of the Middle East, and then we go into new businesses such as food delivery. And this was done in 2013. I think at some point we forgot that those were all the things that we set out to do, and we basically let competition and the day-to-day sort of drive us. So in short, the vision was always there to go and be this pan Middle East operator and do more things than transportation. Sort of the sequencing was a bit opportunistic. At some point we had the tech and we had the ability to operate remote markets. You need some basic foundation to sort of expand and do things in sort of remote parts of the world. So I think we had to get that basic thing right, which took us 9 to 12 months. And beyond that, other than a few strategic markets that we had to be in, such as Saudi Arabia, such as Jordan, such as Pakistan, such as Egypt, we really let opportunities drive us. So if I met you 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I would have said, let's launch Jordan now. Since you're from Jordan, you're exciting, you look like a good guy. Met someone from Lebanon. Hey, what are you doing with your life? Let's go and launch Lebanon. So that's really how it happened for the most part, other than the few strategic markets that we more proactively chose to expand into.
Well, I'll tell you right now, my mom says thank you very much for bringing Careem to Jordan. So that's, if you're watching this, here it is, I said it, we're good to go. So you mentioned something about the day-to-day, and I want to talk about that for a second, because at some points, especially as founders, you have to shift your mindset from thinking day-to-day to thinking strategically, and actually giving yourself enough time to do that, whether it's in a day, within a month, within a plan, within a, whatever you're doing within the organization. And I think oftentimes there will be some disagreements along the journey, from whether it's your co-founder, whether it's around other people from the management group. So when it comes to developing Careem's long-term vision with your co-founder, how did the two of you work to stay on the same page and to expand the company? And what was experiencing growth, significant growth, like? How did you guys kind of come across that?
Yeah, so I think most of the entrepreneurs in the room will probably relate to the fact that if you are not strategic or proactive, life in a startup basically takes its own life, right?
Yeah.
And you can react all day long, and even then, time is not enough because there's always a fire, there's always something pressing that needs to be attended to. So there is some level of proactiveness that needs to be in place. So every year, at least in our case, we did what we called a strategy exercise, where we basically said, what should Careem be next year?
Yeah.
And then we did the same the year after. Now, frankly, we did that exercise for, let's say, a couple of weeks in the year, and then that became a piece of paper that we never looked at during the year. But subconsciously, we sort of chose a direction, built perspective on where should we be going. And then during the year, we basically let the day-to-day sort of drive what had to be done and what had to be fixed. Now, on the conflicts, the vision and the strategy will keep on changing, because it is a function of what's happening in the outside world. It is a function of opportunities and problems that you sort of tackle. Where we got something right was in defining our purpose and our values. So the purpose of Careem, which we actually spent a lot of time defining at the beginning of the journey, is to simplify and improve the lives of people in the region and build an awesome organization that inspires.
And that never changed, by the way.
That never changed.
That never changed, okay.
So purpose, you define it once, it's eternal. There's no time-boundedness, it remains the same. I love Disney's purpose. Disney's purpose is to make people happy. You can never be done with making people happy. In the same way, Careem's purpose was simplify lives and build an awesome organization that inspires. And most of us who have lived in places outside of, let's say, more developed parts of the world, realize that life in our parts of the world are very, very challenging. I was in Pakistan over Eid, and I saw my dad spend 10 hours that week that I was there just trying to get clean water so that all of us could drink water, take a bath. And so basic things that you almost take for granted in some of these parts of the world are a struggle. And when people spend so much of their time getting these basic things in place, they don't have any mind share to think and do big things. So our sort of purpose is to simplify the lives of people around these basic things, so they actually have the time and the mind share to think and do big things. So that's one part of our purpose. And we also realize that doing that is most likely not enough, because if you do this, people have time, they might actually waste their time in unproductive means. So we need to also create some self-belief. We need to create some inspiration that's going to get these people on the right track. And that's where the build an awesome organization that inspire comes in. So let's free up people's time and then give them an inspiration to go out and do these big things.
Yeah.
So we really want to help the region realize its potential, its human potential and the potential that the people have. And that, there was absolutely no disagreement was. This was written in the first year of Careem, we still have it, and all of us fully believe in it. That never changed. And the values, they change slightly, but they don't change much. And if you have core conviction and agreement behind purpose, then the rest is all minutia, right? The things will keep on changing. Today this is the right answer, tomorrow something else is the right answer, day after tomorrow something else is the right answer. And a lot of times in startups, especially in technology startups, you don't have to be rigid, right? You can try something, see if it works. If it doesn't work, you try something else. If that doesn't work, you try something else, and you keep trying, right?
Absolutely, and I love how you put that into perspective, because I think one thing people typically forget is the values of an organization and how it actually should drive your business, essentially.
Yeah.
All decisions should come back to values and what you stand for and what you are. We don't talk enough about failure, and this is kind of, I just want to ask you kind of a question off the top. Failure it's a beautiful thing, and there's a lot of wisdom to failure as well, and we don't necessarily talk about that. What's some of the failures that you believe Careem maybe had early days, or some of the regrets that maybe some things that weren't done in the beginning that could have been done, that should have been done, that you didn't have a chance to do? What's some of the learnings from that as well?
Yeah, failure is a magical thing, right? So, before I got Careem right, I had 2 massive failures. And the good thing about failures is that they really hurt, right? And that hurt, like that feeling forces reflection. Sometimes success, people get on a high and then they forget about all the things that led to the success. So I actually believe that you learn a lot more from failure, because you are actually pushed in a corner and you have to sort of reflect and come out of it, than you learn from a success. So the biggest failures at Careem, and we've made tons of mistakes along the way, but the biggest failures that I sort of think could have ended up in a bad place were mostly around people hiring and firing. There are times when you need leaders, you need people to come and do stuff, and sometimes you get people on board that may not be aligned with your purpose, may not be aligned with your values, and these people then start building organizations that are aligned with their purpose and their values and their agendas versus what you're trying to build. And all of a sudden, you have an organization that's completely alien to the culture and the place that you're trying to build. So I think there have been times when we have not hired the right people. When we've realized we have not hired the right people, we have not exited them fast enough. And I think if I could do one thing all over again, it would be that I would be involved in the hiring of everyone up to, let's say, 200 people in Careem.
Wow.
And then I would just make sure that I'm like watching like a hawk, who's a good fit, who's not a good fit, and exiting the people who are not a good fit very early on in the process. This really simplifies so many things if you have everyone in the company who believes in similar things and who has a similar value system that they make decisions from.
Okay, so can we talk about that for a second? Because you mentioned people, and I think you mentioned actually a while ago, you talked about the fuel. People is the fuel the fuel that powers the rocket. Mm-hmm. And that being said, what are some of the things that you would look for when actually bringing on new talent onto your teams? What's some of the criteria, the kind of individuals, the characters that you look for beyond skill set? Because we know skill set you can fill. Typically, you can find enough computer scientists, you can find enough developers to kind of bring on. How do you find for culture? Like, how do you actually really pinpoint that out?
Yeah. So culture is a very loosely used word, right? So let's define culture, and then we can see what one can do. So culture is basically, in our definition at least, is a manifestation of the values that you have. So, for example, if I grew up with the value of honesty, then that's going to reflect in my behaviors. And if everyone at Careem or an organization is honest, that becomes the culture, right? It's an honest culture. So similarly, in the case of Careem, we were quite deliberate in defining what values we subscribe to. So we basically broke them down into 3 big elements. So there is a value on being very ambitious. So the idea is that if we want to achieve big things, we need to at least aspire to do big things. And if everyone at Careem is not super ambitious, then Careem will not be ambitious. And if Careem is not ambitious, we'll never end up doing those good things. So that was one big value pillar at Careem, around ambitious, around shooting for the moon, around doing things that are inconceivable at this point in time. The second value, going to our meaningful bit at the beginning, was around being of service. So being of service to our customers, especially to our captains, to our communities, to our colleagues. That was the second value pillar. And the third value pillar was around ownership. So once you define these value pillars or values that you want your organization to have, then this is just a question of figuring out who fits these values, right? You can ask people 5 questions and you'll know if someone is ambitious or not, right? Or how ambitious they are. You can ask people 5 questions, and you can easily find out how much they care about the community, how much they care about captains, how much they care about customers, or whether it is all about them, right? So once you define the values, then it's just a function of having the right assessment against those values, and then you start building an organization that operates in a consistent way. If there is someone sitting in Morocco who has nothing to do with, no interaction with me, but he has the same value set, he's making the same decision with the same information, same circumstances that I would make, right? Then you can actually let these people run independently without any checks and balances because the value system is consistent. So it really goes down to the definition of values and then making sure these values are a filter to hiring, promoting, and firing of people.
So do you ever feel like you're running into a bit of burnout? And how do you typically, there's a lot of pressure on you to kind of fulfill the values, bring on the right people, deliver on objectives, make sure that you're not kind of skewing away from the main kind of focus. Of course, this puts a lot of pressure on you, and as an individual, as a person. Because at the end of the day, you're human. You're superhuman in many different ways, but when it comes down to the core of it, how do you deal with the burnout? And what's some of the things that you actually kind of shift back towards to allow you to come out of deep waters?
So I don't know if I've burnt out yet, but there have been times when things have become very challenging.
Should we ask her the question? No, okay.
Yeah. I don't think I've been burnt out yet in the journey, or it's not gotten to the extreme where I'm completely dysfunctional. I've actually managed to still operate, even if not full potential, full capacity, but somehow that has happened. But one thing that you realize very soon as the operation grows and the business grows, that you cannot and you should not try to do everything yourself, right? Because you're not going to be able to scale and you cannot do everything yourself. The key is to have a strong leadership team that works like a team. And then you sort of put your burden on them and they are sort of pulling this thing along with you. And this is not something that we did very well at the beginning of Careem. We basically hired people that met all the criteria. They are very smart, they're talented, like they are driven, they have the values, they know what they're doing. And they were all like amazing people that aligned with our values, but we were not able to build a team out of them. They were all doing their own thing. Someone is running Saudi, someone is running the tech org, someone is running something else. And it was only until last year that we actually very deliberately, and it was too late. We actually had to sort of build a team together. We basically said, look, these 10, 15 people, you are our team. Yes, you have your own objectives, but the bigger objective that you'll be measured on and that you should be accountable for is Careem's performance, Careem's objectives. So you actually need to bring the team together, align them behind the company's common objectives, make sure there's a lot of trust between the leaders in the team, and then it becomes a lot easier because then the team is sort of running the business versus you are running the business. We're not there fully, but we are in a much, much better place now than we were, let's say, a year ago without having this team.
Sure, yeah. Maybe on the same topic, because there's a negative stigma around mental health in our culture. We're two different cultures, but mental health is a real thing, especially in the world of entrepreneurship. And working in a space, I've seen hundreds of entrepreneurs regularly who are heads down, going from morning to night. They neglect everything around them. Eventually, they come back up and they realize that they're going through midlife crisis or depression in some cases. How does Careem actually support and kind of help provide opportunities for your employees to deal with that? It's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a real thing. First, there are no employees at Careem, so we don't like the word employees. We call them colleagues. Colleagues
okay.
Or owners, and that's sort of the. And while we don't have anything systematic to help people deal with it, and frankly, we are probably a little bit biased since we're based in Dubai, we're from the region. If someone has low endurance, we probably like, what the hell is wrong with you type of approach, which is not right. And in some cases where people have burnt out, and people have been burnt out, we've actually been able to give them some time off. Hey, just get out, be out for 2 months, get recharged, and then insert back in. And in most cases, that's worked well. People have sort of completely checked out, left everything, given the handover for the roles they were playing, and then basically come back into the business and taken on new roles.
Got it.
So it's actually worked quite well in cases when it has happened.
Okay. If I can just shift gears a little bit and talk about women, because I think Careem's done a lot of work around empowering women, supporting women. Can you just give a bit of a synopsis around this and how and what's your kind of role in that and the leadership from Careem on supporting women in the region?
Yeah, so this is frankly a little bit of an afterthought, but one that we feel super blessed to have the opportunity and the ability to influence. And it really started with our business in Saudi, because when we went to Saudi in 2013, women were not even allowed to drive. Now today they're allowed to drive, but still if you go on the streets of Riyadh or Jeddah, you will not see many women driving because they're all waiting for other women to drive before they start driving themselves, right? There's still that wait and see approach. And what we realized that by just giving them a sort of ability to move at will creates a lot of empowerment. Because up until now in our societies, they were dependent on their fathers, brothers, husbands, even if they were able to drive. Or it was a bit of a stigma for them to basically go out and use public transport in certain segments of the society. So what we were able to do, one is, of course, just the basic service allowed them to get transport whenever they wanted.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of work done to sort of understand their requirements and then make sure that we tailored the product to their requirements. So for example, in the early days of Careem, there was an incident that happened which was actually a bit shocking and really shook us, which led to some changes in the service. And it happened in Dubai. And one of our customers, a female customer, got dropped off at a location in Dubai. For some reason, didn't like the ride very much, rated the captain a 2-star. And as soon as she rated the captain 2-star, the captain called her and basically said, "What the hell? You're playing with my livelihood." And this British lady lives by herself in a strange place. Captain knows where she lives, is terrified, right? It's like completely terrified, right? And I took that phone call because back then there was no one to take phone calls. So I took that customer service call and I was like, "How can I help you?" And then I heard the story and then like, holy shit, this is an issue that we have to deal with. Yeah. And that sort of opened our eyes to things that we had to sort of change in the way that we delivered the service to look after women. So for example, from that day onwards, we never shared the phone number of our customers with captains.
Got it.
In the Middle East, it's very common, right? The captain gets a number, the captain calls you, where are you located? Because we don't have street addresses or locations that work well, right? So phone number was the way that they would get navigation or advice on how to get there. So to sort of overcome the lack of a phone number, we had to create a call center, which would be called by the captain. The call center would call the customer, understand the location. We had to map many parts of the region because that phone number was not something that we could depend on, and so on and so forth. So a lot of changes had to be made just to cater for that one aspect of privacy and sort of cultural sensitivity. And there are many other things done as well, such as background screening of captains before they come on board. Many of the captains in our societies, especially the people that become captains in these conservative societies, they don't experience being as close to women as they might do when they deliver our service. And things that they do inadvertently, without even realizing if they're doing something wrong, create challenges. So for example, in Pakistan, a captain told, sort of addressed a woman as something, there was a term that was used, and the captain had no idea that term was not the right term, and that woman got offended. How dare you use such a term, right? And that was a term that he would use for his sister and other female relatives, and that was completely fine, but that awareness wasn't there. So we have trainings around what is harassment, what is not, and every captain has to go through those trainings. So a lot of things had to be done just to make sure that the service is delivered in a culturally sensitive way for captains, for women. And now, by the way, we have women captains in many of our societies, right? So in Jordan, in Pakistan, Egypt, in Saudi, we are trying to figure out a way to give them a way to earn a living too.
I was very impressed when I walked into a car in Jordan and the captain was a female driver, and it was awesome. It was really good. So, yeah, congratulations on that. So maybe we can talk about the future a little bit right now. So Careem connects a region of 600 million people, and every year the opportunities presented obviously become bigger and bigger.
Now in the context of this acquisition, it, by the way, took a couple of years to sort of materialize because there were different approaches at different times with different structures and formats. And what was super important to us, the sort of the leadership team, the founding team, was that the purpose of Careem survives. Because if you look at the regional context, the region unfortunately has not been able to build such technology platforms. And we got lucky, right? We got lucky, we were at the right place at the right time. the right factors came together, we grew, and we became what we became. And where Careem is today, we actually believe that we are uniquely positioned to leapfrog our region into the digital future. So many things that are taking so much hassle, so much manpower, so much wasted time in our region can be done so much better with technology. Transportation was a big problem for many people in our region, right? They would have to hire their own drivers or figure out different ways to get around, but it's no longer an issue. Getting clean water should not be a problem. Getting decent education, decent healthcare can all be done in a much more efficient way through technology. We don't have to do things the same way that Europe and the US and other parts of the developed world build that infrastructure. We can actually use technology in this day and age to do things much more efficiently, much more effectively. But you need that platform. You need that regional presence, you need that trusted brand, you need that ability to build a technology that scales. And we actually believe we have all of these things. So the future of Careem is to become what we are calling the consumer internet platform of the region. We're currently doing transportation. We'll start doing food delivery and other deliveries that are very adjacent to our business. But over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, everything that you need from the offline world in your day-to-day should be available through the Careem app. Just like transportation has been simplified, everything else should be simplified so that you can actually spend your life spending time with family or thinking of big things and doing big things. We actually want to simplify your lives to an extent that you don't have to think about your daily life.
So that was going to be my last question, actually. Kind of looking at chapter 2 of Careem, what's the most exciting thing for you? Like, where is the evolution going? What's going to be happening? What's going to be different than what you've done today to kind of stay relevant and leverage technology to make people's lives better? And if there's a lot happening, what's that one thing? And by the way, folks, I'll open up to questions right after this. So
yeah. No, so in a nutshell, the geographic footprint is what it is. We don't plan to expand to Africa, Central Asia, the rest of South Asia, which are all markets that we've explored at some point or the other. But we actually are much more excited and passionate about going deep in our existing markets. So where we currently just do rides, even in the rides business, we're still less than 1% of the addressable opportunity. How many people use Careem in Jordan? Probably less than 1 to 2% of the population, addressable population. What's that 98% doing, right? They're still using their own cars, or they're using buses, they're using vans, or they're not moving around when they want to be moving around. So there is a 98% that is still open. So one of the big things that we need to do is to figure out how can we become more affordable to actually provide a service, transportation service for the masses in our market. So that's one big thing that still needs to happen.
So maybe micro-mobility might become an option here then?
Micro-mobility is already happening. So we're launching bikes and scooters in Dubai. We've launched buses in Cairo. We're looking at pool shuttles. These are all experiments that are running in different parts of Careem. We haven't quite figured it out yet, but this is a big, big priority at the Careem level to figure this out. What you'll see next is a sort of simplifying the offline world thing. The offline world in many of our countries, in many of our cities, is a mess. There is no trust. Every time you go to a store to buy something, you haggle, you don't trust this person. Like, there's just so much wasted time and effort in that sort of basic transaction, right? So that offline world, we just want to bypass, leapfrog. So deliveries of all sorts, services of all sorts delivered to your doorstep is something that we want to enable. And there is a piece that needs to be sort of foundational piece that needs to be put in place, which is digital payments. Because without a digital payment platform, it's very difficult to do many of the things that we want to do. So you will see us make a much bigger push on what we're calling Careem Pay, Careem Financial Services, that's going to underpin all of these other things that we want to do on top.
Love it. That's incredible. So there's going to be a huge kind of growth potential for Careem and what's happening already in the region. And I think I can tell you for now, where I sit and where my parents live, it's going to be exciting because these are things that they don't have, that they should be having, to kind of, again, make their lives a bit easier and better. So that's great. Right. So we're open up to the audience if there's any questions. There's going to be a lot of questions. So we're going to try to take as many as we can. So we have 2 mic runners. So Omar, maybe we'll start with you. If you want to give it to the gentleman over here. So I'll go between side to side, by the way.
Thank you so much. So as you mentioned before, you're the only unicorn in the Middle East. So you're becoming almost like a super figure or a superhero to many of the entrepreneurs that we know. And I originally come from Egypt. Now, a report that I read in 2016 coming out of McKinsey Digital, it said that around 50% of the population in the Middle East at the time was under the age of 26. And we have what was called a youth bulge, where if this large youth population isn't utilized, they will become a burden on the society. So from experience working with the region, what can be done to sort of energize and utilize this youth population so it doesn't turn into a burden on society? And right now, over the past 2 years, investments have been pouring in much more than, have become much more available and so on, and startups are starting to somewhat thrive, especially after the Careem acquisition.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and frankly, I'm not a policymaker, so probably won't do justice to the answer, but the couple of things that come to mind is, I think education is super critical. Many of the youth in our region are not adequately qualified to play the roles that need to be played in the current and the future time. So we need to figure out a way to crack education at scale, and doing it the ordinary way is going to be way slow and expensive. So we need to figure out through technology, how can we sort of make that happen much, much faster. And this is something that we've discussed some ideas on, partnerships on. We may play a role, but this is one thing that at the highest level needs to be cracked. Second, a lot of industries in our region are very inefficient, and you can, in our parts of the world, there's an opportunity under every stone, right? Because there's a problem every minute that you live in our societies, right? So there is a lot of inefficiency, and I think we just need to make sure that that enabling environment is given to sort of people, entrepreneurs, business people, to sort of, go after those opportunities, go after those problems. And just to give you a sense, on the Careem side, in Jordan, unfortunately, of all places, the taxi medallion system that exists in New York and other parts of the world, the same has been applied on ride-hailing, for example, right? We can only have X number of cars running on our platform, and it's basically replicated the whole medallion system. There is more demand, customers want more services, more people want jobs, but sort of the regulation is working against it, right? So I think there is that enabling environment, not just for our business, but all the other industries that needs to be sort of created. And then frankly, the rest will happen on its own, I feel. I think successes will lead to more successes. So as a result of sort of our acquisition, the Souk acquisition, funding is starting to become available to startups, which is very, very encouraging. Because as a region, Middle East is a net exporter of capital to the rest of the world, right? We are the ones that wrote the $3.5 billion check to Uber a few years ago. But that capital was getting invested in other places and wasn't coming to the region. But if you look at the returns that some of our investors have made, some of the Souk investors have made, people are starting to take notice. And that money is starting to flow back into the local ecosystem. And the second thing that needs to happen, and which will also happen with time, is the flow of flow of talent into startups. Because most parents in the Middle East, they want their kids to work at the McKinseys and the Goldmans of the world, right? Yep. They don't want their kids to work at the Careems of the world. And I think as some of these things become more prominent, that tide will turn as well. And if you get funding, and if you get talent, the rest will happen.
It's so funny you mentioned that. One of my best friends, when we graduated from university, got into a startup. He goes to my mom. He's like, yeah, I'm not gonna go work in traditional company. I'm gonna work for a startup. She's like, so you're unemployed. And I think the idea of normalizing entrepreneurship and being a startup is yet to happen within our cultures in particular. And I think it's gonna take a bit of time, but it's an important one for sure. Some questions in the back. I think Hamid, back to you. There's a microphone over here. So Hamid will come back to you right after. Sure. Go ahead.
It was a pleasure listening to all the vision materializing with the efforts of you and your co-founder. I want to follow on the permission that Abdullah gave on asking the harder questions. Mm-hmm. It's a market with a lot of competition. And what is being seen is the copycats come along, and although that Ubers get into new markets, even like ships sharing, but the same competition follows. So for you to be ahead of the game, what are the plans that you have? You kind of touched on it in the sense of trying different things as pilots here and there. I want to know about that more. Is it with the innovation within the corporation, your own company, or as a partnership with others who can provide those complementary values for yourself? Thank you.
No, it's a great question, right? And I think what a lot of people, at least in our parts of the world, operate on the principle of, if this is working somewhere, it's going to work here. Let's figure out what's working somewhere else and bring them to the Middle East, or bring them to whatever parts of the world that makes sense. And frankly, we have seen a lot of those sort of startups, a lot of those ideas crash and burn very, very quickly, because the obsession is in copying something versus really understanding the problems that people have in your society, in your countries, in your cities, and solving those problems. So while we can get inspired by what's happening in other places and get some ideas on what's happening with other places, but the obsession and the core focus needs to be on customers, needs to be on problems, and that's how you sort of stand apart. When Uber came to the Middle East, they came in 2013, they had raised, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars already. We were still on seed funding. We had put down $100,000 into the business. We didn't have a mobile app. We were going after a completely different market, which was the corporate transportation market. Because as consultants, that's the problem that we knew, and that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And I feel that if we had obsessed with bringing the Uber idea to the Middle East, we would have been knocked out in the first year. The fact that we were focused on local problems, which made us realize these cultural nuances on the women's side, or made us realize that people don't have credit cards in the region, payment is a huge issue, or made us realize that no one uses maps in the region, and the Google Maps is completely useless for many parts of the region. So that obsession on problems and obsession on customers has to be the North Star. So in the things that we are doing today as well, yes, you should not be blind to what's happening in the rest of the world. Use that as an inspiration versus that as an obsession. You should understand the challenges, the needs, the use cases of the people in your region, and use that as a North Star to solve and make progress.
Hamid, I'm going to come back to this side after. I do want to ask if we can get a female afterwards. Maybe in the back. We'll come back to you afterwards. So, Hamid.
Thank you for coming here and sharing your fascinating story and experience. It was really wonderful. So I feel like in my little experience that, in a startup journey, you have the first phase, which is an oversimplified process, which is really a path before product market fit, which is really a path-finding journey into what is it actually working. And then the second phase, you need to scale. And a lot of the good experience that you share in terms of the leadership team, culture, everything holding together, being involved in hiring and firing, are especially relevant for us as we want to scale to a large organization and go past Series B, C, and so forth. And if you go back to the earliest stage, which I think most of the people in the room are, in the earliest stage when you have to get to the product market fit, and still you're not sure what works or what doesn't work, essentially. And sometimes, it becomes the challenge of, do I want to be stubborn and keep persisting what we're doing, or I need to pivot? And how much of a pivot I should do? And it's such a hard thing for a stubborn entrepreneur. Is there any advice or experience that you can share, whether you call it failure or pivot or changing from this star or otherwise? Because in my lifetime, in an entrepreneur, I've done it a number of times, that has always been the hardest decision, when it's time to let go.
Yeah, no, I think I think you're right. I think there are two phases, right? There's a pre-product market fit and there's a post-product market fit. But this is not one instance, right? It happens the next year, the product market fit discussion will come up again for different segments for the next wave of growth. And sort of so my definition of a product market fit is you are growing rapidly within constrained resources. And that defines a product market fit in some shape or form. Because if you have a lot of money, you can buy growth, right? We can acquire all of you as customers, give you free rides, and all of a sudden we are growing. But if you have constrained resources and you're still growing, this means that customers are coming back, others are coming organically to the platform, right? So growth is the validation of product market fit as long as you define a boundary around constrained resources. And to the answer that I gave earlier, sort of my view is that you have to be extremely customer obsessed. In the pre-product market fit stage, if you're not answering phone calls, if you're not reading all the emails that are coming from customers, if you're not spending a lot of time on Facebook and Twitter looking at the comments that people are making on your service, and almost every day, every week, tailoring and refining your product based on all of this feedback, then you're doing something wrong. And just a couple of things that we did, we had every week, we blocked half a day on Thursday, which was sort of the learning time, right? And failures, again, are the best forms of learning. So we basically would say, okay, so every time a failure would happen, a bad trip, a bad rating, something else, we would sort of note it down, failure, 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 failure. And we would sit down on the last day of the week, half a day, and say, okay, now let's sort of break down this failure. Why did it happen? And what things do we need to change to make sure that this failure never happens to anyone else? And then we would make a list of the things that we need to change in the product so that next week this would not happen. And one thing that we did, which was interesting, and I wish we could have scaled it, was that we would even share the learning report with the customer that had that failure. And we would promise the customer that, look, very, very sorry this happened, and we would apologize before as well. This is the learning report, and we'll do these 3 things to make sure that this never happens to anyone else. And customers loved it. It gave them a lot of sort of loyalty, and they felt like they were shaping and part of our journey to build something incredible.
Wow. One thing I learned early on is that the customer, the famous saying that the customer is always right. In my world, it's not the customer is always right. The customer is the customer. So you gotta figure out how to interact with that, right? So we had a question back here. Yeah.
Hi. I must congratulate you. I'm also from Karachi, and I'm very impressed. I do user experience design. And I was in Pakistan recently, and I had conversations with different Careem drivers, and they ended up telling me that Careem has saved our household, and we're able to provide for our children, and we could have been without, there's people without jobs for decades who've now finally found an economic standing. How are you envisioning the time when vehicles will be self-driven? What about them at that point? I'm sorry, it's a hard-hitting question.
It's a good question.
No, it's a great question, and one that goes to the root of Careem's purpose in some way, right? And we get excited, we get highs when we hear these stories in the rides that we take. So this whole prospect of us not being able to create jobs and employment for them gives us a bit of shivers as well. But here are the facts, right? I think the facts are that self-drive is still some time away. Even in developed markets, it's not at a stage where it can start sort of operating and doing all trips. And when it comes to sort of our markets, it's going to take much, much longer. So just to give you a sense, the cost of a driver is 75 to 80% the cost of a ride in North America. In the Middle East, that number is 25%. So self-drive will have to become a lot more affordable. The car will have to become a lot more affordable for this to economically make sense in our markets. And if you've been on the streets of Karachi, you can imagine that the artificial intelligence will have to become a lot more intelligent for it to become self-driving in Karachi. But having said that, our sort of view is that this generation of people that are working as captains, there's probably not too much we can do for them when self-drive comes and starts scaling. That will probably take 15, 20 years is sort of our view. But what we should do and what we can do is make sure that their kids are getting the education that doesn't make them a driver or push them towards this profession. So in some places in Karachi, for example, we've done partnerships with some schools that give discounted education to the kids of captains. We offered them internships. In fact, one of our captains in Dubai, he brought up the fact that his son had done computer science from Peshawar University. We offered him an internship in our tech office in Karachi. He did really, really well. He joined us full time, and there's a few more people in the pipeline in that same way. And you do one thing for one, and then sort of the word spreads, right? Now I think many more captains are encouraged that there will be opportunities for their kids, and it is worthwhile for them to invest in the education of their kids. So let's just focus on creating as many jobs as possible, giving them a source of living. that can be put to work in the education of their kids, so that's how they get out of the poverty trap.
That's powerful. Thank you. That's really good. So we're going to do 2 more questions. I'm going to do 1 more question on this side. I'm going to go 1 more question on this side. So question on this side. Yep.
Thank you for your time, and congratulations, of course, on your success. Quick question, you mentioned the importance of being at on the right platform or being part of a supporting policy. Can you tell us more about the UAE platform or Dubai, how it helped you with your business?
Yeah, so how many of you have been to Dubai? I'm assuming most of you, right? It's a bit sad, but building a business like Careem would be virtually impossible in any other part of the region but Dubai. Because to build a business like Careem, you need top talent, right? You need, top engineers, you need machine learning experts, you need top marketeers, and unfortunately, the rest of the region bleeds talent, right? There's a brain drain. A lot of people here are from the region. They're here, for better opportunities. So Dubai is a place that allows us to pull some of these people back. The infrastructure, both physical and social, offers an incredible value proposition for top talent. And if you look at our office in Dubai, we have, 50 nationalities? I mean, some of these nationalities are from the region here and there, people that were working at places like Facebook, Google, who have chosen to move back to Dubai or move back to the region through Dubai. And many of them have nothing to do with the region. They are Americans, the British, Canadians, from every other part of the world. And they still find the value proposition of being in Dubai quite compelling. So Dubai offers a tremendous place to build a talent-heavy technology business. It's also very accessible. Emirates Airlines, super well connected, very diverse. So if you want to open Russia tomorrow, you'll find Russians in Dubai. If you want to open Jordan tomorrow, you'll find Jordanians in Dubai. Same with almost all other nationalities that you can think of. So I think we've been blessed that we started the business in Dubai. It'd be very, very difficult to build a regional business, a regional technology business anywhere else but Dubai.
I'm assuming if he actually got into becoming a pilot, would you have joined Emirates Airlines?
Probably, right?
That would have been
surprised.
Look, I want to try to do 2 more quick questions.
Sure.
So maybe we can do this side in the middle, then this side at the end, because we didn't. So you in the back. Yep.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. So I know you mentioned a lot of emphasis on value, and in recent talks, Uber, I think, acquired Careem in the Middle East. Do you feel like Uber aligns well with your values and your vision? And how would you feel if they tried to enter the Pakistani market as well? How would you deal with that competition?
So Uber is already in Pakistan, by the way, and they're fierce competitors, as we all know. And competition is a great thing, by the way. I think, a lot of times when we were raising money, people would often ask me, hey, what if Uber dumps $500 million in the Middle East? How the hell will you survive? And, the simplest answer was, Careem would not be where it is today if Uber had not come to the Middle East. Because we were trying to build a simple corporate car service. And Uber came and really gave us a fight for our survival, right? They sort of made us sharpen the pencils. They made us a lot more aggressive, a lot more ambitious. So, competition is great, and we're grateful to Uber to having led the growth of Chapter 1 of Careem. And now the Chapter 2 of Careem, they will hopefully fund the rest as well. So a lot to be grateful to Uber for. And the question on values is a great question, because from the outside, their values don't seem as aligned with our values. And this was sort of our concern when the first approach was made. We're like, completely different organizations. But 2 things have happened. One is, with the new CEO coming into place, Dara Khosrowshahi, who, by the way, is an Iranian American. So he's actually from the region. When he was at Expedia, he actually built a large engineering hub in Jordan,
right,
which he's very proud of. So he also wants to give back to the region. And one of the first things when he came back, he did was he actually rewrote the Uber values. And one of the values, for example, was do the right thing, period. So while they might be early in they're not fully embedded in the organization yet. But if you look at those values and compare them to the Careem values, they are relatively similar than the previous Uber values. So that's one thing that was quite encouraging. And the second thing that was quite encouraging was Dara was very, very open to letting us remain independent. his big thing was that, you guys, something magical going on. I don't want to touch it. Keep running, do what you're doing. And that just allows us to keep our independence, keep our brand, keep our values. So hopefully, we don't have to change much. We keep doing what we're doing, do it much faster with their resources, and make an even bigger impact.
That's a great answer. So we have one more question back here. Yeah.
Thanks again for this presentation. I know there's a lot of founders, entrepreneurs here. If you were to do it again, or for your next project, what would you work on if it was you're looking for a big opportunity that's also meaningful? What are like 2 or 3 areas that you would think about?
Yeah, so there is a reason we are calling it Chapter 2, meaning that this journey and story continues. And I think, so for us, as we are looking at what's next for us, we actually realize that if you really want to make an impact on this region, there is no better place to make an impact from than the scale that Careem has reached. So this is still by far the best use of our time when measured against the impact that we can make on this region. Now, God forbid, if something happens, control gets taken away, or corporate priorities kick in, then we have to figure out what makes sense. But like I said, in the response to one of the questions, I believe education is a big need of the hour for our region. So any next mission, whether it is 2 years from now, 15 years from now, would most likely be somewhere around enabling education for the masses in our markets.
Rob is actually a DMZ alum. He graduated, and then you were acquired by Shopify. So he's probably asking the question so you can think about it yourself too, right? That's probably the reverse model there. So I think, do we have time for more questions? I want to respect the time as well. Veronica, do we have time? Do you have time? One more? Should we do one more luck of the draw? One more, okay. All the way in the back, because I know you've been putting up your hand for a long time. Yeah, I know your hand's probably tired by now. So we'll give you the last question of the day.
Right, sweet, thanks. I'd love if you could quickly talk about the shoes that you're wearing, because there's an interesting story there. They're from, if I'm not mistaken, those are Atoms.
Atoms, that's right.
Atoms, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'd love if you could tell everyone about those shoes.
Do you work at Atoms, by the way?
No, I don't. I don't.
Oh, I see.
And the other question is, so I work at a growth startup as well, and it's intriguing every time I think about when Uber came with the acquisition offer, or must have come with the acquisition offer. Like on one hand, someone's offering you $3 billion for an unprofitable startup that will be unprofitable for the foreseeable future, and on the other hand, you've got Lyft that IPO'd with a valuation of $24 billion. It's not a majority player in the market. Uber is still, and they only operate in North America, whereas you guys have MENA, Turkey, Pakistan, as you mentioned, and the potential was to become the logistics of everything company, from food to other goods and services to even public transit. And Uber, for instance, has, in the town of Innisfil in Ontario, replaced public transit with Uber. So what was the discussion, what were the discussions that you guys had? And I think you alluded to it briefly when you sort of talked about the board and maybe the team not being on the same page with respect to the future of the company. So yeah, I'd love to know more about those, like, what was the discussions like?
Sure. Let me take that first, and then I'll talk about Atoms. So I think when the transaction or the opportunity presented itself, I think and there are a few iterations of the structure and the offer that was made. And what really sort of won the day for us, or won the argument for us, was yes, there's a massive opportunity ahead, and there was no shortage of funding. We had offers on the table to fund the next wave of growth for Careem. And we often said internally that Careem should be the region's first $100 billion business. And that was sort of the aspiration, not from a pure valuation sense, but from the impact that it would represent. So the potential was huge. But what we actually realized was partnering with Uber and doing this thing with them would actually help us do the impact a lot faster. Because at some point, yes, from 3, we could go to 100, and some of us would become a bit richer, some investors would become a bit richer, but we would still be spending a lot of resources on stuff that is tactical, that is not super strategic, and are not able to make the big decisions or the big moves that we should be making. So the decision was basically join forces with them, remain independent, and do all of the things that we wanted to do a bit faster with a little bit more surety. And yes, some of our investors will leave some more upside, but who cares at this point, right? It's all it's irrelevant and it's immaterial at some point, right? The purpose and the impact is more important than the other value creation that could have happened. So that was sort of the high-level thinking behind the reason to join forces. We don't say we got acquired, we say we joined forces, and that's the way that we view this transaction with them. Atoms. This is a fantastic story, by the way. The two founders, Waqas and Sidra, they come from a village in Pakistan. Which village do they come from? Okara. They come from Okara, and the two of them realized that there was a big, expertise to build leather shoes in Okara that was not finding the right avenues in the global market. So they basically start a company called Marcor.com. They start selling leather shoes online. They get accepted into Y Combinator, which is the incubator for startups. They come from a tiny village, and for them to just get accepted in Y Combinator was a huge, huge achievement. And their parents basically tell them that until they get married, they're not allowed to go to San Francisco and join that incubator. So they get married, they travel to San Francisco, complete that program. And I met them a couple of years ago and just heard the story. At that time, they were still doing Marcor. I just said, look, fine, how can I support your story? They said, we need some funding. I didn't have much money back then. I wrote them a small check. And now I buy shoes from them. And they did a pivot to the question that was made. They realized that the leather shoe market was not as big or as exciting than the athleisure market, or whatever that thing is called. So these are Atoms. They're great shoes. And the story behind them is even more phenomenal.
And this is the only shoe that you wear primarily for work?
These days, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, folks, on that note, I got to say a big thank you to you, Mudassir, for spending all this time with us.
Thank you.
I also want to thank the family for allowing you to have him with us for this time. This is, I know, family time. This wasn't meant to be an event, but thank you very much. And a big thank you to Open as well for really bringing this whole thing to life. A small thank you from us at the DMZ. I have a t-shirt in here exactly like mine, because you and I are on the same uniform level, so we can wear this. The other thing that we got you, for those who can't see over here, it's the championship hat of the Toronto Raptors winning the NBA championship of 2019, and on the side we gave you a little engraving of DMZ.
Awesome.
So I just want to warn you, when you walk through, if you ever go through Korea, don't wear this t-shirt openly, because you will be questioned on the border. So just make sure of that. So thank you very much again, Mudassir. Thank you. This is always your home. You're welcome to come back. And if you're ever going to come back and spend some time and you want to work really hard in a space with a lot of really like-minded individuals, the DMZ is your place to be.
No,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.